All right. We had a bit of a technical delay, but I am delighted to be here on the Flow Engineering podcast and happy to have as my guest today, Meico Whitlock, the Mindful Techie. Welcome, Micah. Meico.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
And this has been fun. We had one preliminary conversation just to kind of understand better about what you do. But do you want to give us the broader context? How would you explain your approach in brief?
Absolutely. So I would describe myself as a workplace well-being strategist, and I work with mission-driven teams and organizations on creating healthy workplace cultures and specifically diving into issues related to balance in the workplace. So how do we do our work in a sustainable way, but also in a way that we're able to take care of ourselves and take care of the clients and other folks that we might be serving in a sustainable way where it's not a trade-off. And so dealing with those specific issues around mindful or intentional approaches to productivity, mindful or intentional approaches to how we lead, how we connect with one another inside of organizations, ultimately with the goal of having us do greater work that we're all called to do, but to take care of ourselves in the meantime and to not have ourselves sort of be a casualty of us doing the work that we're doing.
Yeah, that's well said. It's quite a lot we could dig into there. But let me just share a little context on why I thought you'd be a great fit for the podcast. Just the broader context of flow engineering. It's work that Steve Pereira and I had been doing to understand about how to adapt some lean principles around more effective ways of working to the IT world. We're obviously not the only ones doing that investigation, but Steve and I really came to a joint conclusion that there were three psychological factors that were necessary if you wanted to get optimal performance from teams. And the first is a shared sense of value for the work that you're doing and recognizing that people value very, very different things and that there needs to be some relevant angle. Not that everybody's going to value the initiative in exactly the same way, but there needs to be some relevant angle. Some people might be like solving the technical challenge, other people looking for the financial reward coming from a project. Others just want to have a sense of impact. And all of us want a little of all of those things, right? So
Yes.
it's not binary or absolute in any sense. But so the first is a shared sense of value. The second is shared sense of clarity, just understanding what's going on. What are we doing?
Yes.
Where do we fit into the bigger challenge? And then the third, and the title of the podcast, the book, Flow Engineering. The third is a sense of flow, and by that we again we're referring to this sort of it has a dual meaning of both an internal being in a flow state, which is a state where the challenges that you're facing are roughly, giving you a little bit of a stretch for your current skill level. And so you're engaged, you're not bored, you're maximally creatively engaged in your work. That's the internal flow state. The external flow is that teams are actually getting stuff done and
Yes.
they're having throughput of productive, valuable, meaningful work, recognizing that one of the biggest killers of flow is too much work in progress, too many
Hmm.
simultaneous projects that are, start and not finish. And it's a killer, especially in large organizations at scale. So Miko, how would you say, what comes to mind thinking about those three main, we call them elements of action?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty solid. I think if I'm reflecting back to you, I may describe it in using different language, right? So shared shared mission and vision, right? Shared intention for what it is that we're doing right now in this moment, and then we're talking about um, you know a a rhythm for the inner and the outer work that we do, right? And so I think that's totally aligned with what you're talking about. And when I think about sort of the fundamentals of what it takes to create a sustainable and a healthy workplace culture, those are the elements that are part of that. And the the key that I find that's a challenge for lots of organizations is many folks are able to see and to clearly define what I would call sort of the outer work or that outer flow that you were talking about, right? Not recognizing that there are some other pieces that have to be addressed that may not necessarily be as readily tangible or visible on the surface if you want long-term sustained success. So simply adjusting, an outer workflow might give you short-term success, right? Short-term progress.
Mhm.
But over the long term, if you're not tending to what you talked about in terms of the inner work or the inner flow, then it makes it challenging to, particularly when you were talking about bringing a team of people together toward a shared mission and intention. It makes that work a bit more challenging to sustain over the long term.
What's coming to mind, and hope you'll forgive this very tech-oriented analogy, is if I think about my parents or my dad in particular struggling to use computers, right? Which he's been struggling to use computers for, for a good long while, for 40 years or so, and there's a level of confusion and a level of frustration, right? He just doesn't quite understand how the program's organized, how to get it to do what he wants it to do, and so in response, it creates an emotional reaction of frustration, and
Mm,
he's not so likely to do this, but it's not uncommon. People would yell at the computer or frustrated. What he would tend to
yes.
do is just click the wrong place again and again and again,
Hmm.
and just be doing things that are obviously wrong when viewed from the point of view of someone who knows what the program is supposed to do.
Yes.
And I'm comparing that to the social domain, right? Like if we think about the moving parts in organizations, a lot of the people that I'm connected to here are with technology organizations. Obviously,
Hmm.
technology work very, very deep, very sophisticated, lots of moving parts. That
Yes.
itself is one challenging domain. But you bring in all the humans, right? And the humans, uh, the way they work is not exactly obvious from the outside, right? Just like the way a bit of software works is not
Yes.
necessarily obvious from the outside. Like your initial impressions about how to get the software to do what you think you want it to do is one thing. And then you just click on it and bang on it and so forth. And the people that you're bringing into the organization also, you don't quite know where they came from, their background, their intentions, their biases, and what they like, what they dislike, and how to get them to go in the direction that you think everybody needs to go in. And so you do the
Yeah.
equivalent of like clicking on them multiple times, you're clicking in the wrong place. Like, Meico, come on, don't you understand, right? This is like critical revenue generating part of the project. Or don't you understand? This is like such an interesting technical challenge. And not realizing that the people you're talking to are just not, that's not the way to get them engaged, not the way to get them activated.
Yes.
Sounds like that's resonating with you. That
Yes. And so I would offer that there are some fundamental assumptions that I'm going to make in terms of how I would approach a situation and what you're talking about, where you're looking at external results and you're wondering why things aren't happening, and you're trying to figure out how do you work with a person or with a team of people to begin to shift the dynamic so that you can see different results. I start with just a basic assumption that we're all basically good, and that we're all, no matter how we're showing up or expressing whatever the external results are looking like, we're all doing the best that we can with what we have right in the moment.
Mhm.
And that ultimately, in terms of how we show up, how we are perhaps motivated on some fundamental level, we all want to be seen, we all want to be heard, we all want to be validated, we all want to feel like we are contributing to something that is greater than us, even if we aren't consciously articulating that. And so if you take that understanding, if you take those assumptions and you layer that onto how you interact with someone in order to be able to shift this outer result that you're experiencing, um, you 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 find that you're able to actually establish a connection with the person or the team that goes beyond simply this external result that you are that you're focusing on, right? And I think that's the starting place for diagnosing and figuring out from the inside out how you begin to shift the outer result that you are experiencing.
So you would say from within the various human needs, you'd say this need to have an impact, to be heard and understood by whoever you're working with, but then also to have some impact in the work that you're doing, to feel a sense of purpose that what you're doing is. Would you say is that, am I accurately representing that?
Yeah, I would, and again, these are fundamental assumptions, and I will own, like, these are fundamental assumptions that I make in terms of how I
Yeah.
see the world and how I uh, approach the work that I do with teams and organizations, and I've found that that is a solid place to start. And what it
Mhm.
does is it allows us to have it allows us to create a space where there is safety and where there's trust,
Mhm.
and we are co-creating together, right? We are exploring together, and we are supporting one another together. And it's not about a top-down approach. It's not about a person providing a rigid directive. It's about really unpacking, uh, again, what that shared mission is, what that shared intention is for that particular moment or that particular project, and then creating a bit of spaciousness to explore how we could get there together,
Mhm.
right? Um, I've a lot of the sort of the destructive conflict that we see inside of teams and organizations is because that spaciousness that we're talking about to explore and unpack those things doesn't exist.
Mhm.
And there's a whole host of reasons that that might exist for different organizations. But one of the results of that is that people don't feel seen, they don't feel heard, they don't feel valued, and so they disengage from the larger mission, right? They give you the bare minimum, and their attention is um, divided because they are perhaps giving you just enough, right, to
Mhm.
get you off their backs, but then they're thinking about how can they get out of the situation and perhaps transition to a different organization, move to a different department, and so on.
Mhm.
So it's this 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 idea of sort of seeing someone, hearing them, making space for the shared mission and intention that we've talked about. It is, from my perspective, again, critical for getting beyond what I would maybe describe as sort of the superficial external results to sort of long term, sustain, bigger impact, depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve with your organization.
And so there's a it's an interesting paradox almost that because you mentioned there often is some higher level strategic imperative, some bigger need that the team is challenged to take on, but that we're not always giving the creative space for people to engage in that and co-create a solution, as you said,
Hmm.
to think about that, to be part of designing what it is that we think would be needed. Um, and obviously the idea with some higher level strategic objective is somebody is feeling like there's an opportunity to have impact and meaning,
Yeah.
and for whoever designated that as the goal, for them that was a sense of impact and meaning, like we could do this, we could grow the company, we could enter this new market, we could launch a new product, we could make work more effective for everybody. Someone had a goal, but that doesn't automatically become everybody's passion project. But at the same time, everyone, as you said, wishes to have an impact, or it's a reasonable assumption. I'm happy to share your assumption, your
Yeah.
fundamental assumption that people are basically good and want to do a good job and want to have some sense of meaning and impact and want to have a good connection with their coworkers. And so it's like there is an opportunity or an invitation. Well, they're waiting to be invited to co-create something impactful, and that when you have some strategic imperative, then creating the space to involve others in that co-creation process actually lights them up, activates them, engages them, in a way that you otherwise might not get. You'd get a false engagement, right? Short.
Yes. And I think when it comes to the paradox that you're talking about, one of the things that I often remind folks of is that you don't have to be 100% aligned with whatever that larger, uh, I should say, you don't have to be lit up from the inside out necessarily 100%,
Yeah,
100% of the time for
yeah,
whatever that larger imperative or that mission or that intention is, right? And one of the examples that I often share is that my mom, she worked in retail most of her professional career. She's retired now. But if I talk to her and ask her, was like, is that a path that you would have chosen? That's not necessarily a path that she would have chosen, right?
mm,
But it was the path that was available for her,
yeah,
and it was sort of good enough for the moment, right? And
mhm,
she made a conscious decision, okay, if this is the path I'm going to take,
yeah,
then I'm going to give my best to this particular situation. I'm going to give my best to this particular organization. And so part of how we, in my view, find meaning is not necessarily always tied to the ultimate mission or the outcome
mhm,
of the organization or team that we're serving, but
mhm,
it's about what you choose to give to that, right? We give meaning to our work, we give meaning to our life, we give meaning to our relationships by virtue of what we give to them and how we show up for those things. And so perhaps the product that your company is working on, maybe you have a team member or engineer that's not, particularly excited about whatever the app is that you're building, but they are excited about the idea of being able to help somebody solve a problem, right? They're excited about the idea of writing code, right? They're excited about the idea of being a part of a team where they can help support colleagues who are excited about moving that mission forward.
mhm,
It's uh, it's and I think it's something to keep in mind because for most folks, uh, many folks will not have the privilege of having that 100% alignment, right? Where you are 100% sort of aligned with the mission, and it just so happens to align with what you feel like you're called to do in that particular season of your life and work. Many
mhm.
folks won't necessarily find that particular 100% match, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't find meaning and purpose and connection to whatever it is that you're choosing to do.
Yeah. A wise caveat, I think, to not to not have elevated or excessive hopes about how perfectly aligned it would be. It reminds me of the idea of, it's sort of a local optima. It's maybe not the global optima for optimally what would you be doing in your life, but it's given the current constraints, that's sort of the near local optimal situation you can do. I
Yeah.
was interested in your framing that it's through giving our best that we derive a sense of meaning in something. That um, it was just interesting to me because it does take, like your mom thinking about that. She's having to unlock her creativity to think about how to solve whatever problems are arising. It's taking energy, taking time, taking patience. And in a sense, you could just say it's a big act of giving. She's giving her time. She's giving the best hours of her day, the best weeks of
Hmm.
her, best days of the week, best years of her life, for some purpose. And implicitly, there is a sense for her that this is a worthwhile thing. This is the best thing that I could be doing here at this given time.
Yeah, and I think, so this sort of gets a little bit deeper into what we're talking about is sort of the inner work or the inner flow. Again, this is an assumption that I'm making here, but that life is fundamentally a give and take, right? It's
Mhm,
a giving and receiving,
mhm,
and if the balance is off on one of those sides,
mhm,
you end up with the blockage or stagnation, right? And so, in the context of the work situation, um, if someone is not giving what they could give to a
mhm,
situation, then that could lead to a buildup of resentment. That could lead
mhm,
to a buildup of sort of disengagement, right? A buildup of sort of maybe burning out or being disconnected from the work or the organization altogether, and then that's sort of has a domino effect in terms of what the sort of the outer results, if you will, what the outer flow is looking like. And so it's one of the reasons where when I talked about earlier about connecting with folks at the level that they're able to be seen and heard, at that level, you're able to understand what someone's what someone's justification might be, or what sort of inspires someone, what motivates
Mhm.
someone, and how are they connected to the mission. What is it that they enjoy giving? What is it that they enjoy receiving in terms of the experience? You mentioned earlier what it could be about. They enjoy giving their time, their talent in exchange for money. It could be they enjoy showing up and being a part of a team, and knowing that they have the satisfaction of having created or contributed to something that is larger than themselves, right? So there are many different ways that this can show up for the individual inside of an organization.
Earlier on, you'd mentioned the idea of um, I forget the word you used. Was it cadence or rhythm? That
Rhythm, yes.
there's a rhythm that is there would be more sustainable or unsustainable rhythms for people. And I'm thinking about in the lean world, you have this idea of takt time, which is like a rhythm, like the beat at which a new part needs to be delivered, right?
Hmm.
And you organize things around, and that's from the manufacturing world. In the product development world, sometimes you'll have a takt time, which is like your release cycle. So we do a
Okay.
quarterly major release, something like that.
Yes.
Um, and so there are, and in most companies, they've got quarterly board reports and so forth. So there are these certain rhythms already to companies, and there's a human rhythm, the weekends and the days and night cycle and so forth. But what kind of things come to mind when you're thinking about the rhythms that are required to help make work sustainable and
Yeah.
joyful and enjoyable?
So the what you described are some really good examples of sort of systems or maybe parameters that are in place for sustaining outer rhythm inside an
Mhm.
organization.
Mhm.
In terms of the inner rhythm at both the individual level and also in terms of managing a team, what I found can be super helpful is number one, having sort of regular check-ins where you're checking in with what is your shared mission and intention at a particular point or particular season, right? So life and work flows in seasons, and so what might be our intention or focus for a particular season might be a bit different, right? So end of the year, for example, maybe you are focused on something else that requires a bit of a different focus during that time of the year as opposed to maybe a different part of the year, right? Um, Checking in with the priorities that are actually aligned with whatever those intentions are for a particular season or whatever it is that you might be in, right? And these are things that you can do individually and also, again, at the team level. Um, in terms of how this unfolds, as I practice this for myself and also for organizations that I work with, there's a daily process, right, where you're checking in with yourself and checking in with your team. Um, you know, this is malleable depending on what works for you. But I also do this on a weekly basis where I'm reflecting at the end of the week or the beginning of the week. You know what what did we accomplish? What did we learn? What do we want to do differently as we move into the next week? What is our intention as we move into the next week? And then doing that on a quarterly and then on an annual basis, right? And so
Mhm.
that's the rhythm that personally works for me. And that is sort of a starting point in terms of a template that I share with teams and organizations. But each person and each team gets to find the approach that works for you.
Mhm.
And going back to what I was saying earlier about life and work moving in seasons, the rhythm that you are adjusting to can also shift based on what that particular season calls for, right? So the template that I just gave you, maybe that may need to shift based on if you are a new parent, or if you are a caregiver, or if you're caring for, an aging parent, for example, or if you are in a particularly intensive mode at work where maybe you're going through a merger or you're rolling out a new project, right? You're always checking in and asking, what season am I in, and what do we need in order to move to this through this season? What do we need to do in terms of adjusting for this particular season?
Okay. Okay. And so you'd mentioned, this need to create space, for example, and in a sense, it feels like you've talked about the need to create space at the outset of an initiative to help people to understand, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? What's the benefit? But here also you're talking about creating space at the end of an initiative, right? At the end of a week to reflect, to look back, the end of a quarter to reflect, look back.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of this, David Marquet's Leadership is Language. He introduces this idea of red work and blue work. And red work
Mm.
is the active, hot, doing, 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 doing. And blue work is the stepping back and reflecting and observing. And that blue work is necessary for the brain. Literally needs to get into a very different mode if you want it to be in a creative space, or if you want it to be in a sort of reflective space where you're assessing, and that you need this balance. And just like I'm thinking about, and just I guess my final thoughts on this, reflecting on what you said about your mom, is that it's, and it's true for all of us, right? Our current situation is not necessarily the ultimate optimal thing. I'd love to actually be skydiving continuously. So I'm just making that up, but what we're doing at any given moment is not necessarily the absolute optimal thing, but individuals need to adapt to the needs of the organization, but also the organization needs to adapt to the individuals and their
Absolutely.
own rhythms and dispositions. And it really is it's a learning process. It's a process of discovery, learning how to work together with each other in these larger and larger groups. So,
Yeah.
Meico, just maybe final points. What kind of services do you offer? Where can people find out more about you and your point of view in the world?
Absolutely. So folks can go to mindfultechie.com. So that's mindfultechie.com. And they can learn more about my work that I do in terms of learning and development for teams and organizations, and also consulting, where I'm working with you to assess what is the state of well-being inside your organization. Can we work together to put together a strategic action plan to support you in making adjustments based on what your needs are? Maybe you need actual, temporary support. You want someone to actually come in and step in inside an organization and actually help you to assess, your systems, your programs, your benefits, and all of those things with an eye toward how can you create a healthier, more sustainable culture for your people, so that it ultimately helps you to do a better job in fulfilling your mission. But one of the ways that I think about this is, how can I support you in increasing your well-being so that you can maximize your well-doing in changing the world?
Nice. Well framed. Thank you so much for taking the time to help us to think more deeply about this important topic.
Absolutely. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely.